Good morning, everyone. Dr. Stillman here from Naples, Florida, and Jim Laird joining us from rural Nicaragua. Jim, how are you today?
I'm outstanding. I've had a little monkey bird war here going on outside my house. Bunch of monkeys are trying to get into a bird's nest, because nature is warm and fuzzy and wonderful. And so it's been a battle for about an hour and a half. So I
Yeah,
think
and
I think I
amazingly, we
think the
don't hear
birds.
any of that on the microphone.
I know it's done now. I think it went for about an hour, so I think it's over. I think the monkeys surrendered. There's about 20 birds attacking them, so I think that made them give up. Show by force.
Yes, absolutely. Today, we are talking about boosting your immunity strategies for a stronger you. Got to tell you, first thing that comes to mind is how there's a lot of people out there who don't want you to successfully boost your immunity at all because they're making a
And do
lot
you
of
even
money. Yeah,
Yeah. Do you even need to boost your immunity? Or is it more about getting your immune system to act appropriately?
yes. But I think first we got to talk about the fact that there's fortunes being made on the immune system being dysregulated. And that does
Where's our
segue
check?
right. Our patients want us to keep them healthy and keep their immune systems in shape. And that is why our membership programs are very affordable monthly. Uh, because once we get people to that shape, they don't need a lot more work. They don't need a lot more care and attention. And, let's talk about why the immune system has become such an incredibly hot topic. So, over the last really few centuries, but particularly the last 3, 4, 5, 6 decades or so, immune problems have exploded in prevalence and severity. More and more and more of these illnesses are becoming more and more prominent and prevalent. A great example of this is eosinophilic esophagitis, which is a pretty rare diagnosis in relative terms, but it used to be so rare that it was something like 1 in 100,000 people. And they had to go back through biopsies at the Mayo Clinic in order to even find cases before it became more common. And now it's so common that practically every academic medical center with a large academic allergy program has a component of that program that is dedicated to eosinophilic esophagitis. And like I said, that's one example. I could go through every autoimmune or allergic disease on the planet, and you would see the exact same thing. Now, the reason this is so important for people to understand as sort of the backdrop on boosting immunity is that many people don't realize that the real problem with modern immune systems isn't that they aren't strong enough. It's that they are misdirected, they are confused, they are dysregulated. So, for example, instead of your immune system attacking bacteria that need to be eradicated or pruned back in your microbiome, it's attacking your small intestinal villi or enterocytes and creating leaky gut and celiac disease and all these other things, all these other problems. Or it's attacking a brain cell that looks like a gluten molecule, which is or a gliadin molecule, which is what celiac nervous system. Well, what is the word for it? Like celiac. Uh, it manifests in different ways, but it's basically gluten sensitive neuropathies work. So the immune system is getting confused. And that is the context in which people have started to think, well, I've got to boost my immunity, usually as a result of thinking, well, my body is being invaded by dangerous microbes that are going to attack me, derail my system, kill me, take over my body. And there's just so many little narratives here that need to be unpacked, some of which, by the way, are censored pretty heavily. And for which reason we have our email list. We have private webinars on Thursdays that only go out to the email list where we cover those kinds of topics for people because we just can't talk about them candidly here. So, Jim, what are your
And you
thoughts
can
on all
go
that?
to stillmanwellness.com and get on the email list. That way we can have open discussions, and we really like to answer questions on those calls.
Yes, we
My
do.
my number one thought is for my own from my own experience, the big thing for me with my immune system regulation, because I was having issues with it, was, getting more sun exposure.
Well, tell your story
You know,
briefly so people know it.
well, I ended up, first I got ulcerative colitis because I was being stupid, working too much, training too hard, being dumb, taking stimulants too much, and I ended up getting ulcerative colitis, and I had to learn how to relax, change my diet, work in, so to speak. Then I ended up getting a pedicure and almost had my leg amputated. And then I met a guy named Dr. Jack Cruz. They were able to get my infection under control with antibiotics, but it kept coming back multiple times a year. And I went to, I met Dr. Jack Cruz, started following him, did a couple consults with him, and he was like, "Dude, like you're in the gym from 5 in the morning till 8 at night. Like, when's the last time you seen the sun?" And so he really, brought it to my attention about, how the sun runs your immune system, that your immune system changes with the seasons, just all that stuff. And that's how I ended up meeting you at one of his retreats. And
That's
that
right.
really, once I started getting outside, I started getting in the sun. Um, when all my issues with digestion went away, one, from my colitis, and two, because I had managed them before, but I was sensitive to, like, if I ate gluten, I would be just a mess. Now I can eat gluten from time to time. I don't eat it all the time, but I can eat a pizza and not have any problems. Since getting out in the sun, so my immune system is much better regulated. I think, because as people become human zoo animals, and I think a big part of it too is, like, you know, the hygiene hypothesis. I mean, we've taken it way too far. Like parents won't let their kids go out and play in the mud. They're afraid to, like, oh my gosh, don't get dirty, don't roll around in the mud. Kids here are running around their bare feet. They're freaking, with chickens and with everything else. And I think a lot of the things that we basically had to manage in the past are not there because we're just so hygienic. We're constantly washing our hands with hand sanitizer. And, I think that plays a big part in this whole thing, of our immune system just almost being bored, that it doesn't really have anything to do, because a lot of the things that it would have had to manage, whether it was I'm not saying go out and get parasites and things, but people do use that as a treatment to regulate immune system. Um, but we're not exposed to a lot of the things we used to be exposed to, and then temperature changes and all these different things. We live in this perfectly pristine, clean environment, and I think a lot of times for a lot of people that causes a lot of issues.
Yes. Just to clarify something Jim said, you mentioned that people will use parasites to manage immune issues, which is really fascinating. You can read more about that in a book called An Epidemic of Absence, which is a story by a man afflicted with, I think it's alopecia totalis. He has an autoimmune disorder that causes his body to attack all of his hair follicles. So he has no hair. He has no eyebrows. He has no hair on his head. He has no hair on his body. And he became fascinated by this, and he wrote this book talking about the hygiene hypothesis and parasites and our relationships with our microbiomes. But the interesting thing about that whole hypothesis is that it really was born out of the observation that German researchers came up with, that traditional Bavarian dairy farmers did not have the rates of asthma that modern German children did. And when they examined their environments, I mean, they were outside, they were in the barn with the cows, they were being exposed to a normal, natural microbial environment. But there's some other things there that guys like Moses Manief Vasquez, who's the author of that book, and the hygiene hypothesis authors, I think, completely miss. They're totally focused on the microbes, the bacteria, the fungi, the molds, the viruses, whatever. They're completely missing in most cases. When you read their research, when you look at their literature, you read their books, they're totally missing the sun. They're totally missing electromagnetic radiations and energies. They're missing all these pieces of the puzzle that we see playing a huge role in people's allergic and autoimmune diseases. And that's, by the way, I started this by talking about how people are making tons and tons of money on dysregulated immune systems. We have somebody in the practice who's got allergic issues. And the reason he came to me was, he said, look, my monoclonal antibody treatment for my allergies worked really well, but it was something like $1,500 a month for my health insurance, and everything else to cover it, copays and whatever. And I just can't do that. And I would really rather have a lasting solution, because I'm obviously just essentially renting my body from the pharmaceutical industry with this solution, which is how you really need to look at your relationship with prescription medications. You're renting a level of function. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, we have someone coming to see us who's active duty military, and he needs a higher level of performance right now than he's currently getting. And it's very likely that we'll use things like prescription hormones in order to help him do that, because it's far more important that he be operationally effective than that he have, a pristine, perfect, you know, totally non-dependent on medications life. In the real world, that's just part of what we have to navigate and help patients navigate in a way that's authentic to them and really honors their goals and their needs in life. But anyway, this gentleman came to me and said, "Look, I can't afford these meds." And where the drug development pipelines are going is basically having everyone on autoimmunity or allergic meds that just patch the tire so they can keep going without solving the problem.
Or
And
everyone
this
on
is
a GLP, everyone on a GLP-1 agonist, they're talking about, the
right.
50 to 70% of kids in the next 10 years will be on one,
It's
you know.
insane. It's
Yeah.
insane.
Instead of looking at like root causes, like the food, not getting outside, all
Right.
these
The
things.
food,
Like
the lack
pick
of
the
sunlight, the lack of
pick
exercise.
let's pick the low-hanging fruit. Um, it's
Yeah, and
really,
what
really,
Jim means
really
by
sad.
that is, like, let's do the simple things that nature has given us to keep us healthy. Let's do those things first before we start chasing after $1,000 a month prescriptions, right?
Well,
Because the
and then
reality is,
if you
if you're gonna spend 1,000, 1,500, $2,000 a month on something, you want that to be taking you to a better place, a place where you can scale that cost back and really get back to your life
yeah.
in
Well,
general.
and if you do all the basics, you might only need to microdose something, right? You might not need to take the full dose. You might just need a little bit of help to help keep you on the path, right? Instead of
That's
having to
true.
constantly increasing your dose, increasing your dose, increasing your dose, right? Because there's sometimes people need a little bit of they need a little bit of help. I could definitely think of ways to spend $1,500 much better than on a treatment to manage my immune system. I could think of a lot of ways to spend
Well,
fifteen
the
hundred
other
dollars.
thing about that is that people, let's say that you get your allergies or autoimmunity under control with the drug. That's great. But guess what? You have that problem because of imbalances in your diet, your lifestyle, your environment, and also your total toxic burden.
Yeah.
And the reality is that if you leave those underlying risk factors unaddressed, they're going to set you up for things like cancers, metabolic
Well,
syndrome,
yeah.
heart attacks, dementia. And that is where people are really they don't understand what they're really buying. They think they're buying a cure. They're not. They're buying,
Yeah.
essentially lipstick for the pig.
Well, look at these commercials for these autoimmune drugs. What do they say? It's immune system suppressor. So they're just suppressing your immune system, which leads you open to other infections, which leads you open to always consult with your
Well,
doctor if you're
it can,
yeah.
but
So
that's the really interesting thing about how some of these drugs work. I mean, some of them, but that's a big question mark for me. Like, for example, when TNF alpha inhibitors came out, I looked at them and I said, there's going to be a wave of cancers from these drugs because it's going to suppress one of the body's number one defense mechanisms against
right.
cancers. The truth is, we didn't see that. And that's one of the
Hmm.
things where you just don't know what's going to happen. But that shouldn't fill you with hope. You shouldn't think, oh, great, we got away with the TNF alpha inhibitors. Isn't that wonderful? I guess it is wonderful in a way, but isn't it sad that we didn't instead, A, go to the root cause? And also,
Hmm.
that was one class of drugs. Who knows what's going to happen with all these other classes? And this is one of the things that doesn't happen in drug development. They don't look for problems, they look for approval, they look for indication. So once the drug's
Right.
approved, once the drug is safe enough that it doesn't kill people outright or in the first 5 years or 10 years, there's a very clear strategy in the way the systems are set up for them to not find problems.
Yeah.
And that's happened over and over again. That's why so many drugs get approved, And then 5 or 10 years later, biostatisticians and epidemiologists are looking at the numbers from trials, or they're looking at the numbers of new events in a population. And they say, there's a weird correlation here. All the people who are taking this drug had a higher incidence of this. And so
Right.
the data comes out, but the pharmaceutical companies have already made their millions, right? So it's very important for people to be aware of that, which is a big part
Well,
of
and
why one of our favorite things to do is help people with immune issues get to the root cause. And that's another thing that we haven't talked about yet today that we have to touch on, which is just all the toxins in the environment. Why have all these illnesses gone up century after century and decade after decade? The reason is very simple. We have been gradually and steadily and sometimes very aggressively polluting the environment. And these pollutants interfere with normal immunological tolerance and homeostasis. And the result of that is people's immune systems becoming dysregulated and imbalanced. And that's when people say, well, I'm getting sick all the time. You might not need to boost your, I don't really look at that as a immune boosting problem. I think of, okay, something is going on in your body that causes you to be out of balance constantly. And if we just fix that, you're going to come back into balance, which is another thing that people don't realize is that if you actually, colds and flus can be a good thing. And that's something that's completely lost on most people. But if you look at something like, for example, the studies on melanoma, the people who have a febrile illness once in a while have a lower risk of melanoma than those who don't. And the theory behind that is that when you get a fever, it causes your immune cells to find these little micromelanomas and destroy them before they turn into bigger ones. Fascinating,
the
all these
purge.
little connections here and these little things that people miss because there's not people are not educating people about this, which is why we're here today and why we appreciate your likes, your shares, your comments, your subscriptions to the newsletter. All of that means a lot because it allows us to go out and educate more people to think about these things in a nuanced way that isn't just take more turmeric or eat more chlorella or whatever.
Yes. Well, people, and that's the thing too. Like, we haven't taken into consideration the consequences of eliminating chickenpox or eliminating, reducing the flu, suppressing the symptoms. A lot of these things are the body's natural way of developing resistance and immunity to other things, right? And so we don't look at the complete system, and everything more or less happens for a reason, right? And it's interesting with things like cancer treatments and even drugs. A lot of these cancer treatments, they'll consider it a success as long as you don't die from that specific cancer. But if you die from something else a year and a half later, they still book it as like, oh, you didn't die of cancer. That was a success, right?
Or if you have
So
a prolongation of life without an improvement in quality of life. Like your quality
right,
of life may be trash, but you may have 4
right,
weeks, 4 months, a couple years.
yeah,
Is that a
yeah.
good trade-off for you? Maybe, maybe not. But, a lot of it gets lost in the marketing. So,
So let's go
we
through like a few basic
yeah.
things we can do, simple things we can do to make sure our immune systems are humming along optimally. And my number one is going to be sun exposure, circadian rhythm, making sure your sleep is in order. That's basically because that's going to help with detoxification. It's going to help with hormone regulation. Vitamin D. Plus, most people don't understand what light does to your blood, right? And then the sleep. If you want to have a good, strong immune system, a good balanced immune system, you've got to rest. You've got to get that darkness. So getting your light environment, that would be my number one thing. And then you can go and give a couple more if you wish.
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with the sun exposure thing. People need sun on their skin, in their eye to a certain degree. Obviously, you should talk to your doctor before making changes to your diet and lifestyle. There are occasionally people who I say we've got to moderate your sun exposure. And obviously, if you want to be, obviously, I don't know, I guess this is maybe not obvious if you're new to this, but if you'd like to become a patient at my practice, you can go to stillmanmd.com. And you can book a discovery call, find out what our practice is like, who we help, and how we can serve you. And then we can actually explain to you how much sun you may need to get. So there's sun exposure that's critical. When it comes to, well, there's the flip side of that is that people need darkness at night. They need to be resting and repairing and rejuvenating the body at night. above all, probably the most consistent thing I see in people who are struggling with frequent colds, flus, feeling like they're sick all the time, feeling like their immune system doesn't work, is their sleep is not where it needs to be. Sometimes they're in the dark about this, pun intended. They think their sleep is good, but they do something like look at an Aura Ring or another fitness tracker and they find out that their sleep is actually horrible. So, making sure the sleep is deep, that the sleep environment is excellent, is really critical. Beyond sleep, we need to think about what is going on in this person's, say, diet. I like to see a very mineral dense, mineral rich diet, lots of whole foods, avoiding processed, canned, packaged as much as possible. There are plenty of things you can buy that are packaged and sort of processed, but the less in general, the better. And that's because you'll find yourself being uh there's just lots and lots of little hidden variables there. We see high aluminum levels, for example, in people who are consuming a lot of aluminum packaged foods. We see what else? Um, I was just looking at the lining of the tomato cans I used to buy my tomatoes in, and they're lined in copper because it's a non-corrosive metal, or at least it looks like copper. It looks like it's got copper in it. Maybe it's an alloy. And I thought, wow, how much copper am I getting from this? And is it the type of copper my body can use? I don't know. So guess what I did? I started to buy fresh tomatoes and cook with those instead. Little
Or
things
like with
like
me,
that.
I would buy the pasta sauce from Sprouts in the
Yeah.
glass jar, right? Yeah.
Yes. Glass over plastic any day, every
I'm gonna
day.
use that in the Monster Mash and pour it in there, and
That's right.
yeah,
So all these
good stuff.
things add up. All these things matter. We help people figure out exactly what to eat, how often to eat, how much to eat in order to achieve their goals, which frequently people, their diets are just so out of alignment with their goals. Just fixing that has a tremendous impact. But I like to see, like I was saying, a very nutrient dense, mineral rich diet for people because I find that being the single most impactful thing that they can do.
I think one of the big things that's often overlooked is breathing through your nose.
Oh
You
my
know,
gosh, yes.
so just by putting the tongue in the roof of your mouth and consciously breathing through your nose throughout the day, one, it's gonna lower your revs. It's gonna give you more rest and digest time, which is going to help with your immune system because you're actually going to absorb nutrients. If you're running around over breathing and breathing through your mouth the whole day, one, you're sucking all sorts of air. It'd be like driving with no air filter on your car. You're sucking all sorts of stuff into the engine. The nose is incredibly amazing at filtering out things. There was
Yes.
a country during the beer bug that basically used like a nasal rinse with people, and basically told them to breathe through, which is really what should have happened. They should have said, "Hey, be outside, do all the things, breathe through your nose as much as possible. Let's use this nasal rinse to kind of clean your nasal cavity out." And their incidence of the beer bug was incredibly low. I can't remember, somewhere in Europe, maybe Belarus or something like that. I'd have to look it up, but
Yeah, but you also have to
so
remember the
breathing.
testing for all that was completely flawed. So
Oh,
it's
of
like
course, of course.
anyway.
Yeah, yeah. It was all a charade, but we can't really say that. But we could get banned for that. But that's okay. So the slowing down, the breathing through the nose, nitric oxide production, lower blood pressure, you know, being able to relax and shut off and go to sleep at night. All these little things kind of add up and help
They
support the
do.
system because it's basically a bathtub. Once that bathtub overfills, and there's all sorts of different things that contribute to the bathtub, then we end up in trouble. So we want to make sure our bathtub is, a quarter full, or to keep the quantum people healthy, we want to make sure happy. We want to make sure we have a good redox potential, right? So that our body can handle a lot of these insults.
Absolutely. Yes. That's the name of the game. That about covers it. You need to avoid toxic things. You need to have strong circadian rhythms. You need to get sleep at night. You need to get sunlight in your life. That's the beginning. Most people need help dialing that in, figuring out what that actually means for them, depending on where they are in the world or what's going on in their life. We work with tons of different people who have all kinds of different constraints that we help them navigate so that they can figure out what they need to do in order to achieve their health and wellness goals. And you can join our email list at stillmanwellness.com. Learn more about what we do. Join our Optimal Wellness membership. Jim, do you want to tell people about the memberships?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really great tool because you can get on calls. Like I have a call tonight in the VIP version. There's the Optimal Wellness membership. Then there's the VIP if you want more, attention and help. The Optimal Wellness membership's like $1 a day. You get 2 Q&A sessions with Dr. Stillman and myself a month. Or you get one with Dr. Stillman and I and one with me. And then you get all the replays to our Thursday webinars. You get all sorts of different things in the program. And it's like $1 a day. But that allows us, a lot of people that can't get into the medical program right away, or they don't, they can't travel to Florida, end up coming into the coaching side of things, and they do all the basics, and then they end up getting themselves in a much better place. And if they can't see Dr. Stillman, and Dr. Stillman's been on calls where he's gotten on Google and he's literally helped people find doctors and telling them, hey, this is what you need to ask your doctor. You need to ask about these tests. These are why I would do these tests. So we can educate you on what you need to do. We can't give you medical advice, but we can help you. And if you want to get into medical practice and say it's going to be 2 months before you can make it to Florida, a lot of people get into the coaching program and then they switch over to the medical program and they already have great momentum.
That's right.
And the people and no matter whether it's HTMA or the medical practice, we start with the fundamentals, and the people that take the fundamentals seriously get much, much better results. And
Absolutely.
So a lot of what we do in the coaching program is, getting to know you and then picking out the obvious things. Like a lot of people have a really hard time with self-observation and they can't see the things they really need to work on, whether it's stress management or dietary change or you've got to change your workload. These are all things we can look at and help you navigate through, because most people can't do that on their own. They don't have the ability to look at themselves, and neither do I. That's when I wrestle, when I do combat sports and things like that, I hire a coach because the coach can see things that I can't. So that's a big part of what we do over there. So the two go hand in hand. But it's nice because we can literally work with you no matter where you are in the world. And we've got people from all over the world in the coaching program. So you can go to Stillman Wellness to learn more about that as well. And then make sure you get on our email list. I think, what is our topic? We're going over your protocols. Let's see.
We're talking about methylsulfonyl this week on the Thursday webinar.
Oh,
yes.
Really
fun. It's called MSM is the
MSM.
supplement. We're going to cover how we use that in the practice.
Also known as DMSO.
No, different, but similar. DMSO converts into MSM in the body, and no one's ever been able to tell me why we should use DMSO instead of MSM, but it's okay. We'll find out one day.
Well, the one reason would be if you're trying to suck something into your body through the skin, right?
But as we're going to talk about on Thursday, that can go horribly wrong. So,
of course it can, just like anything can. So. Yeah. That's why they banned it, because a kid sprayed something on his ankle and it got sucked right into the skin.
Well, they didn't ban it.
Well, they banned it for, like, you can't, it's highly, well, you can go to a vet place and get it, but it's highly shunned upon. It used to be regular practice. Like back when I was first playing football, you put DMSO on everything, right?
Yeah, right. Not so anymore.
No.
All right, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Great to see you all. Take care. Again, we thank you for your likes, comments, shares, and subscribes. They mean a lot. We're here to help as many people as possible. We look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Take care. Have a wonderful day. Make sure you get outside.